Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker from A Healthcare Z, and welcome to the How to Sell in Healthcare podcast. Today's episode is going to be on the technology adoption lifecycle. Now, don't let that topic scare you. It's actually much more straightforward than it sounds, and it is super important in terms of understanding how to sell employee benefits, healthcare, and health solutions to employers. Now, this comes from the work of a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Moore, who wrote a book over 10, 15 years ago. It might be 20 years ago at this time. The book is called Crossing the Chasm, and it is how new technologies or processes or solutions are adopted by businesses or organizations. And it comes originally from the work of a gentleman by the name of Everett Rogers, who was from Iowa State. And it was research that was done initially in the 1950s in regards to the adoption of new crops or corn seed by farmers. And they found that the way that this new seed or these new potatoes were adopted by farmers followed a bell-shaped curve. So not everybody adopted it right away. Not everybody was skeptical right away, but rather people segmented themselves into different groups in terms of how they adopted the new thing, whether that thing be an employee benefits healthcare solution or a new corn seed. Okay, so those groups are the early adopters, the pragmatists, the conservatives, and the skeptics. Now, Jeffrey Moore even further breaks down the early adopters into an even smaller group called the enthusiasts, which are like the early adopters. Now, I will, for the sake of simplicity, I'll just kind of put the enthusiasts and the early adopters together all in a group. And the number of people in each of those four groups actually follows a bell-shaped curve in regards to its distribution. And it is what is referred to as a normal distribution. In other words, there's one standard deviation on either side of the bell-shaped curve, which means that the early adopters are 17% of the population, the pragmatists are 33% of the population, and those are the early adopters. Okay, they're sort of above 50%ers. And then you get to the midpoint of the bell-shaped curve, and then after the midpoint of the bell-shaped curve, you get the conservatives, which is another 33%. And then as you get to the little tail of the bell-shaped curve, then you get to the skeptics, which is the final 17%. And that approach follows many things. It even includes adoption and use of the internet. And if you go on to Google and you Google what percent of the US population does not use the internet, then it's like around 17% because they're just skeptical. So this holds true for all sorts of things. So so it's very important to know about those different groups, and they kind of adopt new things like in that order, right? So the early adopters adopted first, and the pragmatists adopted second, and the conservatives adopted third, and then the skeptics, if they ever adopted at all, are fourth. And oftentimes the skeptics never adopted. Okay, so fine. So if you're doing something new, then really your best chance of getting somebody to buy your solution is with an early adopter, not with a pragmatist or a conservative. And an early adopter has a specific characteristic, and it's important to understand that these traits apply to specific people, and that within a company and within employee benefits and within HR, you're going to have, and within, finance, procurement, et cetera, you're going to have different people that fall into each of these personas within the company. And so let's say within the large market, let's say you have a VP of HR, a director of comp and benefits, a benefits manager, and a benefits analyst. You might have an early adopter benefits analyst. You might have a pragmatist benefits manager and a pragmatist director of compensation and benefits, and you then might have a conservative VP of HR. Or it might be the exact opposite. You might have an early adopter VP of HR, you might have a pragmatist director of benefits, and you might have a conservative benefits analyst. But the point is that different people within that bureaucracy of HR fall into the different categories. Likewise, this is true in an insurance brokerage as well. You might have an account manager who is the early adopter, and the producer or the broker consultant is conservative, or vice versa. It might be an early adopter producer consultant broker and a conservative account manager. And so it's important that you, and initially I actually would have to write down kind of where each of these people kind of fit in, but over time it just became sort of intuitive, and I could just sort of from mental memory know kind of who was who. And when you talk about your solution, it's helpful to actually identify these people and put these people in different categories, because the way you're going to talk about them, the way you're going to talk about your solution and the way that you're going to sell to them is going to change based upon whether they're an early adopter, a pragmatist, or a conservative. Now, the traits of these three categories we're actually going to buy, again, because we're leaving out the skeptics because they're probably not going to buy, are different. So let's describe them now. So the early adopters have a interest in employee benefits and healthcare. They're sort of employee benefits and healthcare nerds. They just love the stuff. Okay, again, oftentimes you'll see these on like the boards of the local business group on health. They might, go to, they might be, national or local speakers. Because these people love benefits so much, these people tend to go to conferences. So one of the regional conferences that's really big in Texas is called HR Southwest over in Fort Worth. And so these people that quote unquote love benefits, a lot of these people actually go to these conferences because they love it. Okay. How do you also know an early adopter? An early adopter will actually take your phone call. So to a certain extent, you know that somebody is not a pragmatist or certainly not a conservative, because the pragmatists and the conservatives, they're not going to talk to you. So by definition, if they're just talking to you, they're probably an early adopter. Okay. Now, the pragmatists, the difference between the early adopter and the pragmatist is that the early adopters want to learn about your solution just because they think it's cool, or because they want to have some sort of strategic advantage that comes from that solution. And oh, by the way, if you're an early adopter, you're much more tolerant of that solution being buggy. You're okay with that. You kind of expect that because it's so new and so cool that you know that it's probably going to have some imperfections, and you're totally okay with that. Now, if you're a pragmatist, you have a very specific problem you need to solve. So that's the difference between the early adopters and the pragmatists, is that the early adopters are hey, I want to do this because it's cool, et cetera, et cetera. The pragmatists, the only reason they want to do a new solution is because they got a problem. And they got a problem specifically because somebody else within their organization has pointed out they have a problem. Again, I said this in a previous episode, where either the CFO or the VP of HR or even the CEO is pushing down on them and saying, look, you need to fix this, whether it be, poor employee experience on your health plan, whether it be, very high claimant cost, whether it be, dialysis claims that are getting lasered out that you're now responsible for, et cetera, et cetera. Now, so that's number one. Number two is the difference about the pragmatists versus the early adopters is the early adopters are convinced by learning how the solution works. They just love the intricacies of the solution. Now, the pragmatists are convinced that you are the solution to their problem by social proof. In other words, peer pressure. So it's really the references and the case studies that will be so important for the pragmatists. The early adopters, you don't really need those so much. You might want to have a case study at the individual level, but you don't necessarily need to have a case study at the entire employer level, because the early adopters don't require the social proof that the pragmatists do. Likewise, if you are so early in your solution that you don't have a lot of referenceable clients, and to a certain extent, you don't even want to go after pragmatists, because as part of the due diligence process, the pragmatists are going to require references. And if you don't have it like great long-standing references, then the pragmatist is never going to adopt you, because the pragmatists are more risk averse than the early adopters. Okay, then we move on to the conservatives. Now, the conservatives will only do something new kicking and screaming. So they don't really want to do the new thing. They're perfectly fine not doing the new thing. But if they are going to do the new thing, one, then it most likely needs to be baked into an existing solution that they already have so that they don't have to deal with a new vendor. In other words, for example, they're not going to hire Teladoc. They're going to get their telemedicine through their existing carrier relationship, which, oh, by the way, might actually be Teladoc, because the carrier has like hired Teladoc as their third-party telemedicine solution. However, they're going to get it through their existing carrier, because that's one. So one is it's not going to be some separate vendor, right? Number two is it needs to be incredibly cheap. So one of the big differences between a conservative and a pragmatist is that pragmatists are willing to shell out the money for, what's referred to as value-based pricing. In other words, they're willing to pay you, the vendor, a fee that is commensurate with the value that your solution provides to them. Okay, a conservative buyer won't even do that. Okay, they just want it to be cheap. Cheap. In fact, they want it to be so cheap in employee benefits, oftentimes it's just free, right? Because the carriers offer so many baked in sort of quote unquote solutions that are just freebies. And I've sat down in meetings with organizations, large organizations, where they're just like, okay, this sounds like a very, interesting solution, et cetera, et cetera. And they like looked me in the eye and just said, hey, you know what? We're just going to wait until our carrier offers this to us for free. Because we know they will, because of the size of the organization that they were. They knew they could get all sorts of free stuff from the carrier. And I said, okay, very nice meeting you. I'm ready to leave now, because I wasn't going to spend any more time with that person. So the good news is that you can make a killing in terms of whether it's meeting your individual sales quota, or you can grow an incredibly large organization with just the early adopters and the pragmatists. So especially if you're offering any sort of like new solution, the real value in identifying the conservatives is to know that like you're not going to convince them. And so you like move on. And so this is where so then now keep in mind, you now need to overlay this model of the technology adoption lifecycle of early adopters, pragmatists, and conservatives and skeptics. You need to overlay that on the Miller-Hyman buying personas of the financial buyer, the outcome buyer, and the technical buyer. So, this is in sales meetings where I would really start to sweat, because you have to make this like little matrix grid in your head of who's who. And so you're like, okay, Sally. And oftentimes, as you can imagine, the technical buyers oftentimes are very conservative, because they're just focused on, okay, what can go wrong? And I have to make this thing actually work. So this thing, I'm going to be as conservative as possible. This better work. Like, I don't care what you tell me. Like, I want to talk to 5 references who say that whatever it is that you're telling me is actually true, because I don't believe a word that's coming out of your mouth. Okay, so the technical buyer, which might be like the benefits manager or the benefits analyst, is going to be a conservative. And oftentimes those conservatives can never be won over. The only way that they're going to go along with it is because their boss tells them to do it. So oftentimes it's the outcome buyer, whether it be the director of comp and benefits or the VP of HR, who is like looking for some sort of, either one, they're a pragmatist and they're looking for, they've got a problem that they specifically need to solve, or two, they're an early adopter. Okay. Now, and then the economic buyer, CFO, CEO, oftentimes they're very conservative as well. And the reason they're conservative is because they've been burned by all these other quote unquote healthcare solutions in the past that never saved any money. So your solution might actually work. Like, I'm not discounting that your solution actually works at all, but they've been burned by things like disease management, where they invested all this time and money and it never showed any financial benefit. Or wellness. They spent all this time and money on wellness and it never showed any financial benefit. So the entire space of employee benefits and healthcare vendors, to a certain extent, the entire well has been poisoned. And it's not your fault at all. It's just because of the space that you're in and the history of previous buyers getting burned. So that's just the reality that you have to deal with. Okay, so not only do you have to apply that to the different buying personas, but then you have to apply it to the different market segment sizes, i.e. small group, mid-market, and large group jumbo. And this is where the sales cycles can be shortened. And this is why going to small group and mid-market can be advantageous in terms of closing deals, even if the deals are smaller. And here's why. It's because there are fewer people involved in the buying committee, and there are fewer people that need to quote unquote sign off in order to make the sale happen. And therefore, you decrease the probability of a skeptic or a conservative being part of the buying committee. So in other words, if let's say for small group, you don't even have a VP of HR. I mean, the CEO, it's a 75-person company. They've got, some controller, CFO, maybe even the CEO that's actually doing the HR functions. And let's say they're a pragmatist and they've got an early adopter broker. Bam, you got it. You persuade the early adopter broker, then you and the early adopter broker persuade the pragmatist CEO, and you're done. Or, the best way to thread the needle is you've got an early adopter broker, an early adopter CEO, and it's very easy. So you just have to find those people. You just have to find them. So it's not a matter of anything else other than just finding those people. Now, once you get to so what? You'll be in some situations where you have an early adopter broker, and what happens is that early adopter brokers tend to have early adopter clients, which is why if you go through the broker channel for small group and mid-market, you're much more likely to find early adopter employer clients than if you went direct, because you don't know. But if you can and by the way, by early adopter broker, I mean like even within a brokerage office, so within Arthur Gallagher in Atlanta, so because we used that example in the past, you're going to have early adopter brokers, pragmatist brokers, and conservative brokers, and skeptical brokers. And so you don't even want, let's say just for round numbers, let's just say that there are 10 producers in that Arthur Gallagher Atlanta office. Like 2 of those producers are going to be early adopters and 3 are going to be pragmatists. And those are the only 5 you want to convince. Don't even try to sell to every single broker at that one office, because some of them are going to be conservatives and skeptics, and it's a waste of your time to even go after those people. So really what you're doing, and by the way, the pragmatist brokers, they probably won't even buy until they see the early adopter brokers have success. So what you're really doing in the channel strategy for small group and mid-market is you're just going to all the different offices for all the different brokerages, and let's just say they on average have 10 producers. You just want 2 people out of those 10. You just want the 2 early adopters out of those 10. So you want 2 in Atlanta, you want 2 in New York, you want 2 in St. Louis, you want 2 in Seattle. That's all you want. And then you move on to the next brokerage and you get 2 from that. And so that's all you're trying to do in the beginning. And then they're going to take you to those early adopter clients that they have. Okay, now in the large group and jumbo world, it's much harder, right? Because it's a buying committee. And almost by definition, you're going to have people within that buying committee that might be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who need to say yes to this, that are going to be either conservatives or skeptics. And so just know that if there's a buy decision in the large group and jumbo group, not everybody at the client is going to be on board. And not everybody at the benefit consulting firm is going to be on board. So like by definition, there are going to be people that don't like the fact that the sale is happening. So don't try to convince everybody. You're not going to. What needs to happen is that enough people with budgeting power within the organization fit the early adopter and pragmatist role, and they not you, but they themselves are going to either up manage or down manage or side manage those conservatives and skeptics. Now you as the salesperson and then the ongoing account manager team is going to have to help those people sell the ongoing success of the program. And as you can imagine, oftentimes the conservative person, now they won't be a skeptic, because if it's a skeptic, the deal will never happen. The conservative person will be the CFO or the people who are looking at the financial metrics of the solution. And that's where if you have, let's say, a pragmatist VP of HR and an early adopter, head of total rewards or director of benefits, etc., and they say yes to the sale, just know that your solution and your reporting and the way that you continue to show value for your solution, you're going to feed that to the VP of HR, head of benefits, and you're going to need to help them sell the CFO on the success of the program such that they want to keep it. Now, let me give you a specific example of that. So this is where it was at about a 700-person software development company. So they did customized software, including apps for businesses. So it was a bunch of software developers, and they hired Compass, and it wasn't their CFO that hired Compass. It was actually their head of benefits and their VP of HR. They actually did have a head of benefits and a VP of HR. Okay, and their broker. Okay, so we had those three that were either early adopters or pragmatists. We put in the program, and really the strategic value that they then sold to the CFO was, because as you can imagine, it really was the retention, the attraction and the retention of the software developers was crucial to the success of that company, right? Getting and keeping really good software programmers is super hard to do. And the CFO knew that. And because our service was so helpful to the employees, they raved about it. They loved it. And the spouses of the employees loved it. And they would go to the CFO and they would say, look, from a financial standpoint, our company is gaining so much value from having the employees actually really like our benefits because of this Compass service that we have. And that CFO would actually speak on our behalf at conferences because of the strategic value that Compass brought to their organization. Likewise, we would, and that was from an employee benefits experience standpoint. And likewise, we had employer clients who, because Compass was able to provide that enabling tool for the movement to a consumer-directed health plan, to the extent that they offered it as a dual option and then as a 100% replacement plan, and they were literally able to lower their employee benefit spend by anywhere from 15 to 20% as a result of the Compass and the price transparency and the network sort of maximization steers that we did in conjunction with the consumer-directed health plan, that the CFO, we lost the entire VP of HR and the entire benefits team. They either quit or they got fired for some other reason. But we kept the CFO, and the CFO, and then the new HR person came on, and the new head of benefits came on over a period of years. And the CFO said, we're keeping this Compass thing because it allows us to keep our CDHP, and there's no way we're going back to a PPO program after we have saved so much money moving to this CDHP plan. So you need to, and the HR people are like, well, we don't know Compass, we've never heard of them before, we never worked with them before, and the CFO was like, we don't care. You need to figure out how to work with him because there's no way we're going back to a traditional PPO plan, and Compass is what makes it work. So, just understand those dynamics. So now you got three dynamics that you're having to overlay. You're having to overlay the technology adoption lifecycle of early adopters, pragmatists, conservatives. You're having to overlay the buying personas of technical buyer, outcome buyer, economic buyer. And then you're having to overlay small group, mid-market, and national accounts jumbo. So you've got three different levels. It's literally a three-dimensional matrix that you're trying to create here in your brain, or maybe you could create computer software to visualize this. So that is incredibly hard to do. I mean, that is why really good salespeople have to be incredibly, you got to be incredibly smart to understand this and navigate this. And oh, by the way, I only do it okay. I'm not really good at it. I would be in sales meetings with other people really skilled brokers and benefits consultants because they were salespeople, or sometimes even the carrier reps, and they were so good at this. They were like Michael Jordan. They intuitively knew how to do this. They didn't have to think about it, right? Michael Jordan doesn't have to think about his jump shot, right? He just does it, right? These people didn't have to think about their jump shot. They just do it. But in the beginning, you got to think about it. It does not just come naturally. It takes skill. It takes practice. It's like a craft. It's like writing a really good song or creating a piece of handcrafted wood furniture. So with that, I will bring this episode of the How to Sell in Healthcare podcast to a close. Again, this is Eric Bricker with A Healthcare Z. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your day.